They say history is written by the victors. But what if the victors were the ones who died? 300 men, standing at the edge of the known world, facing a tide that blotted out the sun. You've heard their story. You've seen their glory carved in marble and flame. But what if the truth was far more human and far more haunting? In the year 480 BC, the world held its breath. A god king from the east, Xerxes of Persia, had unleashed an empire that devoured nations like fire through dry fields. His armies stretched beyond sight. His fleets darkened the Aegean Sea. And at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, the hot gates, 300 Spartans stood in his way. But this is not a story of victory. It's a story of defiance and deception. Behind every heroic tale lies a shadow. Behind every legend, a motive. Why did King Leonidas choose to stand and die? Why did a handful of men face certain annihilation, while the rest of Greece watched and waited? And how did their final breath become one of history's loudest war cries? This is not the story you learned in school. This is the story of power, of propaganda, of men who became myth. Before Thermopylae became legend, there was Sparta, a city unlike any other. Cold, calculated, ruthless, a society that stripped away everything, comfort, mercy, even love, to forge a single purpose, to fight. Here, boys were taken from their mothers at 7, taught to steal, to endure hunger, to never cry. Their lives were not their own, their bodies tools of the state, their hearts hardened by design. They were raised not to live long, but to die well. Every strike, every scar, every drop of blood was for one promise: Sparta will never fall. And yet, in the end, they did fall. Not to swords or arrows, but to time and to truth. Because the story of the 300 Spartans is not just about bravery. It's about what bravery was used for. The next hour will pull back the bronze mask and reveal the faces beneath it. The truth is not what you think. Before the 300 stood at the hot gates, Sparta had already fought 1,000 battles, not with swords, but with the human soul. Every empire builds itself on something: gold, faith, power. But Sparta was built on pain. To the Spartans, weakness was not an error. It was a disease, and they found their cure early. When a Spartan child was born, it was brought before the elders. Tiny, crying, helpless, and judged. If the body showed any sign of imperfection, a crooked leg, a frail chest, a weak cry, it was cast away into the cold ravine of Mount Taygetus. Those who survived were not lucky. They were chosen. At age 7, the boy was taken from his mother's arms. He entered the agoge, the training that turned children into weapons. No comfort, no shoes, no food unless you stole it. And if you were caught, you were beaten, not for stealing, but for failing to hide it. Every lesson was pain. Every victory, survival. They slept on reeds. They fought each other until their knuckles split and their bones cracked. They learned silence, because complaint was weakness, and mercy was treason. This was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was design. Sparta was surrounded by enemies, and enslaved by its own fear. For every Spartan warrior, there were 7 helots, enslaved people from conquered lands, who tilled their soil, cooked their meals, and whispered in their shadows. And the Spartans feared them. Every year, the state declared war on its own slaves, a ritual of terror, so the young could practice killing, and the helots could remember their place. This was Sparta's true secret, a nation that lived in constant dread, not of Persia, but of collapse from within. And yet, out of this darkness came something remarkable. Men who could march without rest, endure without food, fight without fear. They were forged to obey, to make their deaths mean something more than their lives ever could. Among them, one man stood apart: Leonidas, a king born not into comfort, but into the same brutal furnace as the rest. He had bled in the same dirt, trained in the same silence. And when the gods of Olympus seemed silent, he became their voice. Leonidas knew the truth. Sparta could never win a war against Persia, but could win something greater, immortality. And so, when the Persian messengers came, demanding that Sparta bow before the great King Xerxes, Leonidas answered with words that would echo through eternity. Molin lay, come and take them. But those words were not mere defiance. They were prophecy, because Leonidas understood something few men ever grasp, that sometimes the surest path to victory is to die on your own terms. And so, the die was cast. Sparta would march, not for glory, not for conquest, but for a message written in blood. As the army gathered at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, the world began to shift. The gods grew quiet, the sea grew still, and history waited. While Sparta trained its sons in blood and silence, another world was rising to the east, golden, infinite, a world that called itself eternal. This was Persia, the greatest empire mankind had ever known. From the mountains of India to the sands of Egypt, from Babylon to the shores of the Aegean, its banners blazed beneath the sun, a world stitched together by conquest and ruled by a single hand. That hand belonged to Xerxes, the self-proclaimed God King. To his people, he was not just a ruler. He was divine, a living bridge between man and the heavens. But even gods, it seems, are haunted by the ghosts of men. 10 years before, his father Darius had tried to crush Greece and failed at Marathon, 26 miles from Athens. The Persian tide was broken by a handful of men who refused to kneel. To Xerxes, this was not history. It was humiliation. He would finish what his father began. He would burn Athens to the ground, and he would erase Greece from memory. So he gathered his legions from every corner of his endless dominion: Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Indians, and from the cold hills of the Caucasus, men with eyes like winter and blades that curved like serpents. They say his army numbered 2 million. Perhaps an exaggeration, but when you looked upon it, it might as well have been infinite. The Persians didn't march. They moved like a tide, unstoppable, devouring, inevitable. Behind them, bridges of ships stretched across seas. Before them, cities knelt in silence. And yet, there was something strange about their enemy. The Greeks were fractured, 1,000 city-states, each more prideful than the last. Athens with its words, Sparta with its swords, rivals in everything, united in nothing. But Xerxes' invasion changed everything. For the first time, the free cities of Greece faced extinction. And in that moment, the impossible happened. They began to stand together. In a council at Corinth, they argued for days. Who would lead? Who would fight? Who would flee? Athens offered its ships. Sparta offered its king. Leonidas knew the truth. The Persian army could not be stopped in open battle. But maybe, just maybe, it could be delayed. At a place so narrow, their numbers would count for nothing. A place called Thermopylae, the hot gates. There, between sea and mountain, the God King's army would choke. There, the sons of Sparta would make their stand. But make no mistake, Leonidas was no fool. He did not march to victory. He marched to delay, to sacrifice. For every day the Persians lingered at the pass was another day Greece could prepare. Another day freedom survived. When he left Sparta, Leonidas took with him only 300 warriors, each with a son, so that no bloodline would die that week. He also took allies, Thespians, Thebans, men from every corner of Greece. But history would remember only his own. As they marched north, their red cloaks rippled like flames against the stone. They knew what awaited them. They knew they would not return. And as they neared Thermopylae, a single truth lingered in the air, that sometimes, to stop a god, you must become a legend. The hot gates awaited, and death was already there. It begins with silence, the kind that only comes before something eternal. At the edge of the Malian Gulf, where the mountains kiss the sea, there lies a narrow pass, a throat of rock and dust. They called it Thermopylae, the hot gates, because deep beneath the earth, the ground itself boiled. Sulfur rose from cracks in the stone, as if the gods themselves were breathing below. Here, the world would hold its breath. Here, 300 Spartans and their allies would face an empire. Leonidas arrived first. He studied the land. He saw the mountains closing in like walls. The path so narrow 2 chariots could not pass side by side. Perfect. The sea to their right, the cliffs to their left. No flanking, no escape, just the storm. Then came the others. Thespians, Thebans, a few thousand men in all. Ordinary men, farmers, traders, poets, who would stand beside warriors bred from birth to die. They built a wall of stone across the pass. Simple, rough, but in the days ahead, that wall would hold the weight of the world. Then, the horizon moved. The Persian army had arrived. A sea of men, armor gleaming beneath the sun, stretching farther than the eye could see. Their banners rippled like waves. Their drums shook the earth, and somewhere among them, on a golden throne carried by slaves, sat Xerxes, the god king. When he saw the Greeks blocking his path, he laughed. He sent a messenger. He offered them life. If they would bow, lay down their arms, serve the empire. And Leonidas answered with words carved into eternity. Molin Lab, come and take them. The first wave came before dawn. Medes and Scythians, seasoned soldiers, disciplined, confident. They charged into the pass and met a wall of bronze. The Spartans fought in silence. No cries of rage, no fear, just rhythm. Step, thrust, shield, step. Each movement practiced 1,000 times in the agoge. Each strike precise, each formation unbroken. When the Medes fell, the immortals came. Xerxes' elite guard, 10,000 men draped in gold and silence. But against the narrow rocks, their numbers meant nothing. They could not surround. They could not break through. The Spartans pushed them back, again and again. Bodies piled high. The sea turned red. For 2 days, the Persians poured men into the pass. And for 2 days, the Greeks stood unbroken. Xerxes watched from his throne, his disbelief growing. He had been promised victory by the gods. Yet here in this cursed pass, mortal men defied him. But no wall lasts forever, and no secret stays buried long. A man approached the Persians that night. A Greek, a traitor, Ephialtes. He revealed a hidden mountain path, a way around the pass, a way to strike the Spartans from behind. When Leonidas learned of it, he did not curse. He did not fear. He simply chose. He sent the allies away. He stayed with his 300 because someone had to hold the gate. At dawn, the Persians attacked from both sides. The Spartans fought until their spears shattered, then drew their swords. When their swords broke, they fought with their hands. Leonidas fell. They fought over his body. The last Spartans formed a circle around him and died standing. When the dust settled, the hot gates were silent again. The air smelled of salt, smoke, and memory. Xerxes had his victory, but it came at a cost. 300 men had held his army for 3 days. And in those 3 days, they had lit a fire that no empire could ever extinguish. Upon the stone where they fell, an inscription was carved. Stranger, tell the Spartans that we lie here, obedient to their laws. And so the world would remember the 300, not for how they fought, but for how they refused to fall quietly.